Excuse me. Hello, pocket knife community, knife lovers, knife enthusiasts, interested viewers. Folder here. If you are not familiar with GiantMouse products, GiantMouse makes a line of knives that are their premium knives. The Ace line are their daily drivers, for lack of a better word. This is a GiantMouse Ace Grand, which is their everyday sale, large volume, line, right? But they have what's called their GM line. This is a GM line knife. So their regular line has a liner lock. Usually, the GM line, which is their top line, has a frame lock. For me, I like frame locks better than liner locks, only for the action, right? Liner locks allow you to have symmetry on both sides without the breakup, right? But when you're talking about the action, frame locks are much nicer. They're smoother. They're just, they're more pleasurable in that sense. Well, so this knife is for me, this is a grail knife for me. I've wanted this knife since I started liking GiantMouse brand, and I finally got one. And I specifically like the GM5, which this is the GM5, which the GM line is Ace is modeled after this knife. So the GM line, right, their flagship line, is up to GM10, right? Or they call it GMX. Up until that, it was GM1, GM2, GM3, GM4, GM5. You get the hint, right? Up into GM9, and then they didn't make a GM10. They call it X, right? Roman numeral X, GM10. But if we go back to the GM line and we view this knife, which is the GiantMouse GMP5, and the GM stands for GiantMouse, obviously, and the P stands for pirate. Not sure why, but I'm not going to go into that. Okay, that's what this is, the GMP. And the difference between the GM5 and the GMP5 is this has this dark blade and the dark coated titanium, and just really set up with a different finish. Okay, it's interesting when you go to the website. At the time the GM5 was made, they call this the magnum opus, which is the ultimate GiantMouse to date. So when it hit GM5, that was their of 1 through 4. 5 was their best iteration of this knife. My personal opinion, I love this harpoon shaped blade is the one of the main reasons why I started liking GiantMouse even to begin with. I like the way they did this blade shape. It's simplicity, but beauty. And so for me, going through the GM line, right, their flagship line, the only one that really, really, really attracts me is the 5. So I've been waiting for this knife. And now I finally got it. So let's just get into it. It has a 3.3-inch blade. The thickness of the blade is 4 millimeters or 0.157 inches. The frame length is 4.5 inches. The overall length is 7.8. Close enough, 7.87. Close enough to 8-inch. Close enough to that sweet spot of an 8-inch knife for me, right? Which is a very one of the reasons why I like the knife so much. And it weighs 5.1 ounces. And this is not a Riyadh knife. This knife is made in Manigo in Italy. Okay, so this is one of their Italian-made knives, which people that are familiar with GiantMouse will tell you that The Riot stuff is very high end. Sometimes with the Italian made stuff, even though I really I really tout their Italian stuff because of, you know, the heritage of the designers. um, Sometimes it's a hit or miss with them. Well, this one is a hit. This one is a hit. Yeah. So as far as the overall dimensions, it is identical to the Ace line. So the GM Ace Grand is identical, right? It's just that we're talking about the difference is the liner lock and the frame lock, basically, and then and a few little nuances that make this knife premium. Um, just there's nothing changed in the world with this, but let's just compare it to the PM2. So next to a PM2, if you're not familiar with the GiantMouse line, this is it next to a PM2. Okay. So, like I said, the PM2 is definitely an 8-inch knife. Just trying to get the cameras to, right? So that's that. Right. So you see where it is. And 80-20.5. It's bigger than a 20.5. Okay. That's enough of that. I'm not gonna go through that. Let's just get into the few of the details. My initial first impressions of the knife, how I feel about it, and yeah, and we'll get through this review. Overview, actually. It's not a review yet because I haven't had it long enough. Initial impressions is very good. Initial impressions is very good. It's what I expected. Very well made, very put together, very nice attention to detail. We'll start off with the blade. It is a full flat grind. Well, it's not full flat. It's got a swedge on the top, a harpoon shaped swedge on the top. Otherwise, it's flat. And it's got a PVD stonewash finished blade. It's got the GiantMouse usual, I should say, crowned spine of the blade with their jimping. I initially noticed holding this knife in hand, right where you're supposed to hold it, that the jimping is very far forward. If you notice, I have to stretch my finger out to actually reach the jimping. I would imagine they did that on purpose. They didn't just, I mean, they could have put it further back, but I think maybe they wanted, if you're doing a push cut and you have to bear down, you know, your thumb is obviously the most, it's not a finger, it's a thumb. So the most strength comes from your thumb, being that it's connected to the, you know, the main part of your hand here, the palm of your hand. This section, you can produce more strength. So using the saber grip, well, actually this would be the Filipino because it's on the spine. Anyway, they have it really far forward. No front finger choil to get up on it there. So you're back here with your finger really stretched out. I guess I'm mentioning this a lot because it just seems a little far forward to me. But whatever. That's how the grands are. That's where they are on the Ace Grand. The sharpening choil and plunge grind are excellent. The plunge grind is a grind from the blade to the flat section, to the tang. It actually separates the main section of the blade from the tang of the blade on a folding knife. That's called the plunge grind. And some knives have finger choils. Some knives only have sharpening choils. A finger choil is sort of like a sharpening choil also. But in this situation, it's just a sharpening choil. It's just an area of relief in the back at the base of the plunge grind that allows when you sharpen this, it gives you you don't run into this area. And on this knife, it is absolutely excellent. That's what you want to see, so that you don't run into. There's a lot of sharpenings that you can do on this knife. So that was actually very well made. Going back, it also has the deployment method is a deployment hole in the blade, sort of kidney shaped. It's excellent for to put a finger in. Spidey flicking. The reverse flick on this knife is strong point. It's actually spectacular, I would say. It is. I use the conic Arius because it's one of my favorite knives as a benchmark. It is conic Arius like. The blade is perfectly centered also, by the way. This knife, these are numbered, right? So this is number 10. All right, this knife, I don't know. Let me see here. Right, so this knife is number 10. Of 100. There were only 100 of these knives made. And to date, GiantMouse has not made any more and has no plans on making any more. So needless to say, that creates a very rare condition. And this, like I said, this knife happens to be number 10. The titanium scales or frame of this knife is one of its absolute strong points. Separating this knife from the other, the Ace line. This in my Carter. I also have the scales in. I also have this version in G10 and carbon fiber. It's safe to say that the titanium version far exceeds the other versions. The detailed work, the milling on the titanium is stellar, to say the least. It is very good. It offers a beautiful design, fingerprint free handling, and traction all at the same time. Unfortunately, we have T6 screws back here, and a T8 main pivot is okay. And they also used a T8 for the pocket clip, which also the pocket clip is extremely good. Underneath the clip is a flat spot where that's not milled, as to allow the knife to slide in and out of your pants pocket with ease. It has a full titanium backspacer, and it is big. I mean, it literally covers up. It's almost half. I'm talking about like 45% of the knife. It might even be 50%. So you have the flow through here. I mean, it circles around. It goes all the way down. So yeah, it's and it also has a lanyard. Makes up the lanyard requirement. It's a frame lock, like I said. It has an overstop travel slash liner, and I would say the lockup is, man, I'm doing bad. Maybe 40%. Is it? Well, no, maybe 30. Yeah, maybe like a 35, 30% lockup on the frame here. It feels very good. It feels very good. Very good lockup. These are all T6s also. You know, I did notice, and I'm going to mention, so everything I've said so far pretty much has been positive, but there are already negatives that I notice about this knife, comparing it to other knives of its caliber, that in the classification that this knife is actually supposed to kind of be in, and maybe even knives that are lesser knives. I noticed that this space in between the lock bar and the actual scale is rather large. Like, it seemed like to me like that. I mean, I'm sure that's, it's what they did. They designed it that way to have that space. This is where the designers wanted it to be. Just looking at other frame locks that I own, uh, that amount of space is a little, for me, and especially I'm bringing, this is ZT0562, which is a knife with incredible action, very good action, has no problem with the lock bar, with the amount of space being there. I said, okay, maybe that's just one knife, And I'm also going to take this. This is the Tucson Maverick, which is this is the best budget-friendly, awesome knife ever made. I'm going to do a video on this knife again. I think I did one on it, but I'm going to do another one because this thing, for $140, I just, this thing shocks me every day. It's an incredible, incredible knife. Makes us question everything that we kind of do in this industry. But if you look at the tolerances of this knife, they're very, very, very tight, very close. And the action on this knife is outstanding. Very, very good action, along with an amazing pocket clip. So, I have a few other examples that I can go through. I'm not going to go through all of them just to prove my point about that space. Having said that, that doesn't, love the knife, love everything, that doesn't mean to me, that's just the space they chose to have in there. Okay, so that's not, but that wasn't necessarily my negative. Where my negative lies on this knife is the amount of tension on the lock bar is very high. It's not so high that you can't do it. It's just very high. Heavy, I should say, not high, heavy. It's just heavy tension, a lot heavier than a lot other knives. Sorry, my camera's dying here. A lot heavier than a lot of the knives in the same classification. Not quite as smooth, the lock bar. Like, the experience that I have with some other knives that are frame locks, I would have to actually say are more pleasurable. One thing about frame locks is this area has to be very slick. So when you're coming here and moving that over and putting that, releasing that blade, it's very important that this is a slick area, that it, the lock bar tension is easy enough to be pleasurable as you're pushing it over, and also strong enough to still lock up the blade. Very important. And I think that's one area where this knife falls short. A little bit short. Not horrible. It's not horrible there, but it's not the best. To be my grail knife, to be a knife that to me is going to be very high in my collection as one of my best and favorites. I'm holding it to an extremely high regard, standard You know, I'm pushing the standards on it because of where in my collection this knife is gonna go. It's supposed to be. Uh, does it does it meet my expectations? Yeah, it does. With what I just said about it negative, the positives are very good. And one of the positive is it is an absolute beautiful knife. You know, it's like with the action being what it is, it's almost like a really, really beautiful woman, and then you go out on a date and she can't kiss. I don't know how I came up with that, but you know what I'm saying? It's almost like, but you say, oh, well, listen, okay, she can't kiss, but look at her, she's just gorgeous. So you know, it's okay. It's okay that she's not the best kisser because she looks amazing. And that is the only real negative I would have to say about it. The action. I mean, the blade action drop shot's very nice. It's just that that lock bar, and it might be because the milling, well, the hollowed out area of the lock bar is internal, not external, right? It doesn't. It's not external like this. And what happens is on this particular knife, they did it on the inside, right, for aesthetics. So what happens is when you have that, this is what regulates the tuning of the lock bar. But what happens is when it's hollowed out on the inside like that, now when you push this bar, you're pushing against the strength because the outside hasn't been hollowed. You're pushing against the strength of that, as opposed to one that's hollowed. Now you're pushing out towards the where the relief is. Now, having said that, could they make this, the tuning of the lock bar is all pending how hollow this is, right? If you make the hollow area wider, if you make it deeper, I mean, you can't make it too wide and too deep because then you run risk of the structural integrity of the knife. So there is a breaking point, but you know, I'm sure that you can have this to get the aesthetic that you want on the outside, but still have the optimal amount of lock bar pressure needed to disengage the lock. You know, like I said, it's not, when you compare this to, like I said, some of the best knives I have, and I'm not even going to pull out my Koenig Arius and my Hinderer XM18. I'm not even going to pull those two knives out because the action on those knives are spectacular. Spectacular. I will say right now that as much as I like this knife, it is not quite, the action is not quite in the class of those two knives that I just mentioned. It is not. So I'm just going to come out and say it. Having said that, there are things about this knife that blow the Hinderer out the water. For me. Right? So there are things that this knife has and looks and, you know, that just are better than. So that's what it is, all right? That's where we are, okay? Yeah. So overall, how do I feel about this? I feel very good. I'm extremely happy that I got it. It will stay in my collection. It's going to be in my top 5. I'm going to do a top 10 video very soon of my top 10 knives, and this will be in my top 5. It'll be very high in my top 5 because it's GiantMouse, because I've wanted a knife for so long, because it checks off all the boxes except for maybe one. And you know, no knife's perfect. I can take my best knife and I can criticize it. So, but yeah, that's where we are. So, okay, so we are here. The GiantMouse GM line finally own, finally to own a GMP5. Been waiting for this forever. Finally got one. Um, and overall, very satisfied customer. That's all I got.